One of the most important aspects of pixel art is learning how to simplify the subject that you're drawing. There's a big difference between the number of pixels you have to work with for pixel art and traditional digital art. Traditional? Digital art that's not pixel art, and it can be quite daunting to work with when you're just starting out. I have a project that I'd like to try that involves simplifying a lot of buildings and landmarks, and I thought it would be fun to take you along on the process of building my confidence with the skill and sharing what I learned along the way. And if you haven't met me before, hey, my name is Jade and I like to paint with pixels. To start with drawing some buildings, I need to grab some references, and because I wanted to draw a wide variety of buildings, I came up with a fun little challenge. Though I would love to visit all of these places and grab my own references. Sorry, bird. I decided to use Google Maps and the Street View feature. I'd pick up a little fellow in the corner, drop them somewhere in the world, and wherever they land, I'd pick a nearby building to draw. I wanted to keep it easy at the start, and so I started with houses from where I'm from, the UK. Something I learned early on in the practice was to choose what the smallest feature of the building was that I wanted to stay visible and be bigger than 1 pixel, which for me was the windows. I actually tried at first including the entire window frame for each window, but that made the whole building much bigger than I was aiming for, especially later on with bigger apartment-style buildings. I found that I could shrink the building down by quite a bit if I only added the bottom section of the windowsill under the window. So it was still there and could be changed depending on the reference, but it wasn't taking over the entire building. This practice of picking the smallest element that you still want to be visible in your scene can be really helpful for when you're drawing a series of objects or a small scene, and you want to keep things relatively to scale. I say relatively because I found that my accuracy for keeping everything exactly proportional in size did go out of the window a bit, but I didn't mind that. It sort of gave it a cute, cartoony look, which I quite liked. When you're drawing at this size, I found that a bit of styling of what you see just sort of naturally happens, based on how restricted we are with how many pixels we have to work with. But it was really surprising how much of a difference a couple pixels could make. I try to keep these windows a similar size throughout the buildings, and I think that having this consistent element really helped, especially at the start. It made it feel like I wasn't starting from a blank page every time, and I had this little window of opportunity instead. All pun intended. No? Okay. It was surprising how much variety you could get from the same base and changing the colours of the walls and the roof. I really enjoyed adding in the little details for each of the houses as well. The tiny flower baskets, the solar panels, the vines climbing up the walls. It all felt like it was a nice personal touch to each home. At this scale, there's something really cool about how a few pixels can represent an entire object, and we as the viewer can infer that just from the context that it's in. Part of the time we can't even use shape as part of our toolkit at this scale to represent the object because we're only working with a few pixels, and so we start to rely on values and colour to tell the viewer what it is instead. If we had a much bigger canvas, this flower basket can become so much more detailed. But when you look at the shrunk down version, our brain sort of picks up the context clues surrounding it and starts to make sense of it. I don't know, I just found it quite neat. Once we felt a bit more comfortable with drawing buildings in the UK, it was time to branch out. I did a lot of this practice live over on my Twitch, and for the stream, folks in chat suggested which country we would drop our little explorer friend into and draw a building from, which was a lot of fun. And if you would like to see more of the process, I stream my art every week on Twitch, and there is a link in the description to go check it out. For this practice, I tried to branch out with the buildings that I was drawing, so it wasn't just houses. There were apartment buildings, some shops, and cafes. I also had to think about how I wanted to represent different shapes of buildings, like this cafe in Paris, where one of the walls was at a 45-degree angle instead of the usual 90. It felt like a fun challenge and a mini skill unlocked once we figured it out. I learned that less is definitely more when you're simplifying objects at a smaller size. A good example of this is when I started to add smaller details of bricks to the buildings. I could have tried to add every single brick that I could fit onto the walls and the roofs, but that would make it super noisy and take away focus from the details that I wanted folks to focus on. Instead, I implied the detail by only adding a few bricks here and there to show what the building was made out of. Figuring this out helped me realize that we're not trying to capture every single detail in the reference, and we have to be quite decisive with what we want to capture and include. And then I started getting into more organic shapes. For this project, I wanted to be able to document not only buildings, but also monuments and famous landmarks. You might be able to guess what kind of project these are going to be used for. But this felt like a nice transition between the more structured buildings to the more organic shapes. It's sort of similar to the advice of when you're just learning to draw in any medium, and you start with cubes, and then you start constructing shapes from the cubes, and build up from there. And this felt like a similar approach that I kind of followed without realizing. I think when I got to the landmarks, I felt like I was really in that puzzle-solving side of pixel art. Whenever I try to describe to folks who aren't familiar with pixel art, I compare it a lot to solving a puzzle that feels incredibly satisfying when you solve it, and you can see the subject that you're trying to represent, but in such a small amount of pixels. I don't know, it's such a rewarding part of the process, especially when it's a really complicated reference that you're trying to shrink down. With a couple of adjustments, here is the final result! I'm really proud of how these turned out. I feel like I started to develop a style with these to keep them feeling consistent throughout, which will be really helpful in the next stage of the project, which will be putting them together on a map. I'll be documenting the process in another video here, so make sure that you're subscribed to know when that's out. And if you're curious about other projects that I've done in the past, check out this video here, where we take a trip down memory lane of everything that I made last year. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Take care out there. Goodbye!